Hey guys, what's going on? Episode 11 of the Next Season podcast. As always, really stoked you're here. Appreciate you. So today I want to do something a little bit different. I'm going to do a Q&A of sorts. And this episode, like all episodes, is for the athletes, it's for the parents, it's for the coaches. I really want to make sure that as I'm communicating and sharing these thoughts and perspectives and ideas and things that I've learned, that is really targeted for all three of those. But this episode especially is a Q&A of sorts. And what I'm going to do is take comments and questions and feedback and pain points that I've heard from parents about players. So these are questions and comments that parents are struggling with, coaches are struggling with, players are expressing to their parents and the coaches that they're struggling with. So I want to look at things from a unique perspective around those things. I've been around the game my whole life. I've been coaching for a number of years. I've talked with players. I've talked with coaches. I've talked with parents. I've been a player. I've been a coach. And I've been a parent going through these things. My wife and I have also done some research on our own to find even more common pain points. And as we've reached out to folks and say, what are the things you're experiencing? What are the things you're feeling? What are you hearing? And we've gathered all of this. I've gathered all this information, I've written it down, and I started to recognize that there's some common questions and some themes that, about the challenges and the obstacles that today's athletes face, especially around the mental side of the game. And what I'm going to do in this episode, which I'm probably going to break into two parts, so part one, part two, just so it's more digestible given time and given some of the conversations we're going to have, I want to give you an exact verbatim words from those players or parents about their pain point or challenge. And then for each one, I'm going to introduce at a basic and high level some of the neuroscience and brain-based mechanisms or what's happening at a neural level. I really want to keep it simple, keep it basic. We're not going to get super clinical. We're not going to get super technical with the language. You're going to see some common themes with this. And then what I want to do once we have that, so we've got the pain point, we've got the kind of what's going on in the brain. And then I want to share some ideas and perspectives from the point of view of if it was me going through those things, if I were dealing with these feelings, or if my child or my player was dealing with these things as a parent or coach, here's what I would do. And honestly, again, a lot of these I have felt or dealt with as a player, as a coach, and as a parent. So everything that I'm sharing here in the next two episodes, I'm saying to myself too. As I started building this list of challenges and these pain points, I recognized that there were common themes. And so I started to put them into 6 buckets, which, as you'll see, align really well with the pillars of next season athletes. And to me, it validates the structure of what I'm sharing with the pillars and the values of next season athletes. So I'm not just making this stuff out. The first 4 of those 6 buckets are, of course, talent, effort, ambition, and mindset. Those are our 4 pillars. You've heard this before. Check out the last 4 or 5 episodes, and we break those down. We go into each of those in detail. And as I looked at the pain points and I started to bucket them and categorize them, they align perfectly into these categories. So talent, effort, ambition, and mindset. The other 2 buckets that I started to put some of these pain point comments in are mental health and well-being and external pressures of today's world. Now, I want to call something out on those last 2 buckets, the mental health and well-being and external pressures of today's world. As you know, I am not a doctor. I am not a therapist. I'm not a licensed counselor. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm none of those things. I'm a baseball coach. I'm a father. I'm a former athlete. I'm a certified brain-based coach. I'm a student. And so when I can speak to these things at a high level and I can share ideas and I can share perspectives and provide some guidance and have conversations with individuals and groups about mental skills and mental performance. But when it comes to diagnosing anything clinical, when it comes to anything mental health related, that's not me. Okay. I just cannot do that. So I want to put that disclaimer out there. And when I do these podcasts and when I have these conversations, I've got notes in front of me here. I do research. I have references, right? I don't remember all of this stuff necessarily, but I work to ensure that what I'm saying is as accurate as I possibly can get it. So I just want to point that out. When it comes to some of these things, we're going to have guests on who are experts, who can speak to this stuff. But I want to make sure there's a very clear line between mental skills and mental performance, which is where I can talk, and mental health and well-being and clinical diagnosis and things like that I can't. I can introduce concepts. I can share some thoughts and perspectives, but I'm not going to diagnose and I'm not going to go into that world of pointing out therapies and clinical ways that you can work through some of the challenges that athletes face. So we can introduce it, but that's as far as I'm going to go with it. Okay. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there and make sure I'm completely fair and transparent. So again, this next episode, probably the next 2 episodes, I'm going to present the challenge or the obstacle, one from each category. We're going to briefly discuss the brain-based mechanisms and impact, why it matters for mental and physical performance, and then talk about some strategies to work on them. Okay. One more preface, and this is really for every one of these comments. It's really, really difficult to accurately, and again, I'm certainly not diagnosing anything. I'm almost reluctant to do these at all because individual context is really important to effective coaching. But when I look at these comments, everyone in every situation is different. And this is the value we're coaching. This is where coaching value comes in, because good coaches, great coaches are able to look at the individual and understand, I've seen this maybe 5, 10, 20, 100 times before, but for you, this situation is unique to you. So I'm not just going to give you some blanket solution. Okay. What I want to be able to do is speak to these things as generally as possible without all the context, but good coaches are able to dive into the individual. So I'm reluctant to do this to some degree because I don't want to stereotype or I don't want to pigeonhole, but I think it's enough to initiate some conversations. And so if there's enough value in getting some perspectives and thoughts, and to ensure players and parents and coaches don't feel isolated, or they don't feel like they have a voice, because you do. These are common challenges and there are strategies. And so if the most I can do is share some thoughts and bring some awareness and bring some self-empathy and prompt you to take further action, that's the win. Okay. With all of that context being laid out, let's start. The first pain point, the first comment that I wrote down to include in this is in the talent bucket. And this is a verbatim, this is an exact comment that was shared. And here it is. He has a lot of insecurity about being the smallest guy on the team. So first off, people can be insecure about a whole bunch of stuff, right? The biggest guy on the team could be insecure about his height or his weight as the biggest guy, right? The lefty could feel insecure because he can only play a few positions when he really wants to play shortstop, right? And that's just not going to happen. So he could have insecurity about that. The slow kid, the slow runner can feel insecure about his speed, okay? Despite having power or a great arm strength. Everybody has insecurities. And so I don't say that to diminish the feeling. It's fully legitimate. And in this case, I'm not sure about that player's age, so I can't speak to where they are in their physical development, where he is in terms of his growth spurt and things like that. But when someone feels insecure about their size, really about anything, but in this case, we're talking about size, there are a few things that could be happening at the neural level. First, the amygdala could be activated. And so one function of the amygdala is processing threats and stress responses and fear. And so when a player is dealing with comparisons, right? I'm comparing my size to my teammates, and why are they bigger than me? Why haven't I hit my growth spurt? Why are they stronger than me? All these things. If a player is dealing with those comparisons, deep down, he has fears of not measuring up, literally and figuratively, right? And that can lead to emotions and moods and behaviors that have stress responses, that fight, flight, or freeze. And so remember, when we're in that sympathetic state, right, or fight, flight, or freeze, and increased stress, you cannot perform at your best. So when you're comparing and you're focused on what you don't have, you're not performing to your potential. And there's a downstream impact of that amygdala activation, and that can lead to the release of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and the decreased effectiveness of the prefrontal cortex. Now, I want to be clear, cortisol often gets a bad rap, right? Cortisol in the right amounts and at the right time is great. It's essential for growth and performance. But at the wrong times, in the wrong amounts, or chronically, such as in this situation, elevated cortisol can negatively impact focus and memory and decision-making. And so if this cortisol release or activation becomes chronic, it can reduce resilience and increase self-doubt, which sounds like that could be a factor here. The truth is, when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to projectability and potential, when it comes to typical performance, what coaches look for, what scouts look for, yeah, size matters, okay? But guess what? There are plenty of examples of smaller players who excel. League MVPs, perennial all-stars, starters. Even if you don't make it to the show, you put in the work, right? And that work ethic and those habits that you gain and that toughness and resilience that you can gain from being the smaller guy on the team will pay off in other areas. There are a lot of notable guys who were smaller, but had big time careers. Dustin Pedroia, Ozzie Albies, Mookie Betts, going back a little bit, Tim Lincecum, going back even further, Kirby Puckett, a name that's kind of been forgotten, David Eckstein, Jimmy Rollins, going way back, Joe Morgan, another guy that's smaller in stature, a pitcher, Marcus Stroman. I could keep going, right? And there's certainly, God-given talent and genetics and tools there, but there's also an incredible work ethic and commitment and drive in understanding that they're not using their size as a disqualifier for their potential. My point is, don't you dare let size steer you away from your goals. This goes back to our pillars: talent, effort, and ambition. If you have effort and you have ambition, but maybe you're lacking in parts of that talent pillar, in this case, size, you're an underdog. And we love underdogs. And all those guys I just listed were underdogs. Okay? Why? Because as an underdog, you are demonstrating the grit, the work ethic, the tenacity, the ambition, and all of the traits that are going to produce results everywhere you go. So yeah, physical size can feel like an overwhelming limitation, especially in baseball, where height and strength are often perceived as significant advantages. Here's the good news. The brain, mind, are great equalizers. The bricks and the traits inside effort and ambition and mindset and your heart can trump your size. So it's a factor, but what other skills do you have and what can you bring that isn't impacted by size, right? Focus on that and do what you can to develop every physical attribute that you have. You don't necessarily have to be tall and strong in order to have power, to have speed, to be able to throw well. So if I was this player, and to be clear, I didn't have projectable size. I'm 5'10". I was never the strongest or the fastest, very average built. I'd be focusing on the controllable factors, how I prepare, how I train, my mechanics. I do everything I can to get stronger by how I train, how much I eat, what foods I eat, prioritizing protein. And I'd focus on my mental game, visualization, mindfulness, mental prep, all of that. What's cool is that when we know what's going on in the brain, which leads to these feelings and emotions that come from the insecurity of being undersized, we can tailor our tactics to work on it. So here's 3 things that I would do, 3 things to get more specific on what I would do if I was that player. First, I'd reframe comparisons. I'm not competing against anybody else. I'm competing against me. I want to compare my current self to my past performance rather than the performance of others. Go check out episode 8 about ambition. And we talked about the create a player mentality and identity-based goal setting and that gap versus gain. There's so many notes in there that talk exactly about what we're talking about right here. Recognize how far you've come in everything that you're doing to work towards the player that you want to become. This is going to activate reward circuits in your brain. Dopamine. It's going to reinforce growth and reduce stress. So reframe your comparisons is the first thing I would say. Second thing I would say, and I kind of touched on this before, was around mindfulness, awareness, and then relaxation techniques. And that's all about suppressing some of that cortisol and getting more present in the moment and reducing some of that stress response. So you're not in fight, flight, or freeze, but instead you're able to maximize your performance and you're able to rely on the training and all the prep that you've done. A good breathing practice, some meditation can help to calm that amygdala and reduce that cortisol. And that's going to help you regain focus. And you can do these in sessions, right? You can train this and practice this, and you can do it in the moment. So when you're in the heat of competition, or when you're on the field and you start to feel that, or you're in the practice field or whatever, you're taking BP and you're not getting the results, whatever it is, you can practice that breathing. You can practice that meditation, that visualization to reset and refocus. You're going to see some of the best athletes in the world that close their eyes and breathe, or they focus their eyes on a spot. Maybe it's on the bat, maybe it's somewhere in the distance, but they focus their eyes on something and they breathe. And there's different breathing techniques and different breathing practices, right? But it resets into that present moment. And I know what you're thinking because I felt it too. And this is hard to do. It's hard to stay consistent with. It doesn't feel like it's worth it. There's no immediate gratification that comes along with it, like a pump that you get in the gym or anything like that. There's nothing immediate. And it seems a little woo-woo, but here's the truth. We have actions, and we take actions, and we have behaviors that address all of our feelings and ambitions. When you're hungry, you eat. When you're tired, you sleep. To get stronger, you lift. To resolve conflicts, you communicate. What do we do about our stress and anxiety and anger and our emotional outbursts and other things like that? You need an action that you can take to be able to address it, to be able to respond to it, to be able to control it. And you can't just brush it aside. So it may be harder because you can't see it and touch it or immediately feel it, but it works. So that's the second thing. So we got the first thing is reframing comparisons. Second is understanding mindfulness and relaxation techniques and getting back in the present moment. And then the third is I would look at evidence-based confidence building. And it sounds technical, but really what I mean is making note of building your case and making note of all of the evidence that you have to be confident. I've said it many times. You've heard me say this. Confidence comes from the evidence of the work done. It's the product of consistency and courage. The consistency in the habits and the practice, and the courage to do hard and scary things and survive and be gritty and resilient in response to them. That's where confidence comes from. So when you're building your case, when you're building that evidence, right, you have to be able to look back on it and reflect on it. So doing the work, journal, write down your goals, document your progress, celebrate your small victories, recognize your consistency, do those hard and scary things, and then reflect on them. Reflect on them to reinforce that self-belief. Insecurity, right? In this case, an insecurity because of size, or really could be anything, but insecurity is the antithesis of confidence. And we know where confidence comes from. It doesn't come from size or potential. Confidence comes from the evidence of the work done and the consistency of your effort and the courage to take on challenges. So by focusing on that effort and discipline and your strengths, you can battle that insecurity at the neural level and foster a mindset that thrives under pressure. So that's what I would do. Second pain point. The second pain point comment that I got here from the parent is under the effort pillar. And this is what it says. He's probably the most skilled player on the team, but he doesn't always give 100% effort. Stop me if you've heard that one before. Stop me if that's you. Kind of the opposite of our first player, right, who was the underdog. But now we have an example of someone who has all the physical gifts and talents and abilities. He's got the size, and he may have the ambition and the goals as well, but the effort isn't there. And this is our classic daydreamer. And this is really, really frustrating. Sometimes that highly skilled player is able to rely on his talent, and they hold back on pushing themselves. And there's so much that can go into this. It could be that their natural personality and tendencies are just more relaxed, a little bit more passive. It could be environmental, what it was like in their home or growing up or their current environment that could lead to some of those personality tendencies and preferences, but it could also lead to some work ethic. It could be distractions, right? It could be a response to external pressures. I cannot speculate for this specific person, this specific player, but there's a whole bunch of factors that could be at play. But to talk generally and to discuss some things that are happening in the brain and the neural level, we got to start with that D word again, and that's dopamine. If you've listened to or watched previous episodes and clips, you've heard me talk about this before. Dopamine is often referred to as the reward chemical, but more accurately, it plays a deeper role in motivation and drive. There are studies that show that dopamine levels are not just about experiencing those rewards or feelings and checking off, your to-do list, checking off your sticky notes, right? But anticipating them during planning and during action. And this is why challenges that require effort and progress release dopamine. I want to say this very clearly and very succinctly. When we achieve rewards without effort, we are ruining our baseline dopamine and we are crushing our ability to have intrinsic drive. I'm going to say this again. When we achieve rewards, outcomes, results, without significant effort or much effort at all, we are ruining our baseline dopamine and we're crushing our ability to have internal drive, internal motivation. And this is why blue ribbons and gold medals for everyone doesn't work. I'm not going to go on a soapbox about playing time and all the common issues in sports and education, but I understand the impact that it has on ambition. And when you get the reward without the effort, you are sabotaging that drive. You have a talented player who can get by on their natural gifts and they've achieved a certain level of success and the results that come from talent alone, they're self-trained to reserve their effort and ambition, and they've altered their baseline dopamine. Think about a great player who can get by without much effort. That's what's happening. Okay. So you recognize and you train yourself over time. I don't have to put in all the work and I can still win. I can still be one of the best players on the team, and I don't have to work hard. Well, who's going to work? This is why those structures are so dangerous. Eventually that talent runway is going to end. And when it does, the player who can find that effort and that ambition and that character, right, is going to be okay. Because sometimes there's players that say, you know what, I got to step it up. I've got all the talent in the world, but I got it. You know, my talent runway is ending. Okay. I got to step it up. The talented player who doesn't figure that out is going to crash. So how do you reignite that effort? If I was that player or the coach or the parent of that player, the first thing I would do is find their why. What's driving them, right? Is it love of the game? Do they have a goal to play at the next level? Is it something else completely? Okay. Along with this, determine the values. What is that player value? What specific things do they value more than anything else? Go check out episode 8 about that creative player and the values and the vision. And then also check out episode 7 on all the bricks and attributes that go with effort. Okay. So those 2 episodes are a really good foundation for this conversation. That's first. So the why, vision, values, understanding, all that goes into that effort pillar. The second thing I would do is set incremental goals that align to that why and that vision and those values. So it's not just coming up with some generic goals, but really setting incremental goals that are specifically tailored and aligned to that why and that vision and those values, and establish the action steps that are going to help you get there. Then once you're in progress along the way, reinforce and recognize the effort in that process, not the results or the outcomes. Okay. The third thing I do along with that is I would find some really good, impactful challenges. If I know that I'm talented, or if I'm a parent or a coach of a very talented player, what extra goals and challenges and targets can I work towards? Almost finding where they can get humbled. Okay. Just like a gifted student can get bored in class if they're not being challenged, a gifted player can become complacent. And they need challenge physically, mentally, emotionally, and they need to be encouraged to take on leadership roles and responsibilities. So if you've got a talented player, maybe not have them do the same things that everyone else is doing, but explain to them why you're challenging them more, but give them more impactful and bigger challenges. Okay. Finally, I'm trying to get a much deeper understanding of dopamine and what throws off our dopamine system, because it could be things like phone usage and social interactions and other habits and behaviors or vices, right? There's a whole bunch of things that can impact dopamine. This is really big. This is where it gets a little bit more clinical, and I'm not going to go into that. But understanding dopamine and some of the things that are happening in a day-to-day basis, hour to hour, that could impact our dopamine and our motivation and drive. So that's an important one as well. The bottom line, when players connect effort with growth and rewards, they're more likely to give 100%. For parents and coaches, I caution, push, but don't push too hard. Every player is different. There's some that need to figure it out on their own. There's some that need to find a different path from the game. Okay. Some are not going to figure it out. And as frustrating as that can be, and as much as it might hurt and that can suck, but that's reality. Some are just not going to figure it out. Okay. Some players, you can implement strategies and you can build trust and communicate and you can work with them through it. And then some you can really push. Okay. So understanding your player, understanding your child, whatever that is, recognize where you can push and where you need to pull back a little bit, and also live it yourself. Make it a journey together. If you want your child to train and practice and lift and do all those things, maybe you should too. So that's 2 down. There are 4 more pain points and challenges that I want to make sure I discuss in this first round. That's the first 2. That's enough for part 1. I'm going to do a part 2 with the remaining challenges. And the topics will be ambition. I got a really interesting comment there. Of course, the mindset, which is the big one. And then we're going to go to the mental health and well-being. And then we'll have one in the category of external pressures in today's world for young athletes. Okay. I'll see you next time.